So when I was back in rabbinical school, many years ago, my homiletics teacher tells the story of the rabbi who gets up to preach and he takes off his watch and puts it right here. And he said, "Do you know what that means?" And then there's a long pause and he said, "Nothing, not a darn thing." All right. God is near to all who cry out to God in truth. This is a verse from Psalm 145, which in Jewish life is known as the Ashrei. It's traditionally said by Jews 3 times a day, twice in the morning and once in the afternoon service. And I have been praying on a regular basis since college, and probably daily since rabbinical school. And the verse stuns me. The idea that if we just call out to God, there God will be close to us. I don't know. I like to pray. Well, usually that is. But sometimes something can come between me and my ability to open up my Siddur, my prayer book. Between me and that blessing, I have bipolar disorder, major depression, 35, 40 years of mental illness, and a stroke that made it worse. So mental illness comes with peaks and valleys, like any illness. I can remember a particular valley, as it were. I was sitting in my brand new rocking chair, holding my beautiful, wailing daughter, newborn Shira. She was screaming at my breast and refusing to eat. My tears mingled with hers. I was lost. Eventually came diagnosis, various help for her to learn to eat, to learn to deal with her sensory issues, her fine muscle issues, her gross muscle issues, and for me, a diagnosis of postpartum depression and a referral to a wonderful therapist. And every year my gynecologist asks if I'm still seeing her. Every year the answer is yes. The baby is 27. I'm clearly in this for life. So I want to take a moment to say thank you. Thank you to Mother Amy for inviting me here this beautiful Sunday morning to meet with you, for sharing her pulpit and her trust. It takes a certain courage to say to someone, even a fellow clergywoman, a friend, "Sure, you can come talk to my congregation about mental illness, about your mental illness," and then not at least demand a copy ahead of time. But let me also thank you for welcoming me here. Your faces are kind. Your hearts are so open. But there is so much that burbles under the surface. It has been, over the years, so much easier when I get sick to blame neurology, to blame oncology, rather than psychology or psychiatry. And not that that's necessarily wrong. I had a stroke, over 22 years ago now, and I continue to have issues. That stroke, along with bringing vestibular imbalance issues, chronic migraines, chronic fatigue, also made my mental illness worse. And that can be scary to talk about, even among friends. Mental illness, in all of its insidious forms, comes from complicated roots. It's genetic. It's faulty wiring. It's biochemical, it's biological, it's developmental. And for many of us, it is all that and more. All I know is that nobody wants to be mentally ill. No family deliberately makes their child mentally ill, and no one deserves to be mentally ill. And in theory, there should be no more stigma in proclaiming that I have a debilitating mental illness than it was when I made public my stroke or my cancer. But after all these years of talking about it, it still makes me nervous. As a lesbian friend of mine put it, it's like coming out. So if I were to ask you to close your eyes and then ask those of you who are in therapy or have ever been in therapy to raise your hand, you can picture what that would look like. But then if you open your eyes and looked around, how many of us would feel safe to raise our hands? Therapy, neuroses are an ongoing joke, especially in my community, the Jewish community. Think of Woody Allen. But But too often it's only a joke. It's a meme, if you will, instead of an issue we actually take seriously and try to help those who need help. So I am coming out because I am not the only one. To truly be a community, people need to feel safe to come clean, as it were, to tell each other who they really are and what they might need. How else can we know each other? Who else don't we really know? People whom we might welcome into the church, into our communities, our hearts, our homes, if only they felt safe to share with us. I tell my story so that others, whatever their story, will know that you here at St. Luke's are willing to listen and accept them. And conversely, I speak my own story so that others with complicated stories, and frankly, aren't all of our stories kind of complicated? But others do not have to tell their stories in order to belong. So for me, depression comes and goes. Sometimes my meds keep me functioning well. I teach, I learn, I interact with people. I behave like what we would call a mensch, a human being. Sometimes I have bad patches when getting out of bed to take a walk feels just too hard. It's hard to concentrate. I feel sad or lost or lonely. But as Daphne Merkel said in her tour de force of a memoir of depression, she, or I in this case, can put a mask on, go out into the world, and no one even knows that we were weeping just a few moments before. It's like a light switch. Depressed at home, functioning in the world. And sometimes my level of depression takes hold and I can't find myself. I can't find my soul. And I can't find God. So a few years ago, I read a beautiful piece written by a rabbinic colleague and friend of mine. She was talking about her experience of changing depression meds after having taken Zoloft for almost 20 years. Her mood had started to dip a little bit, so she and her therapist decided she'd gotten all she could from this drug, and it was time to try a different SSRI. She weaned off the familiar drug and took on the new one successfully. She spoke of her long history on the first medication and wondered where the new one would take her. She wrote of her acceptance that she might always need such drugs. She wrote her gratitude that those drugs and her therapist were there to help her through life. And she wrote about also how it was important for people like her to come forward about being treated for depression, about taking medications and going to therapy to fight against stigma against mental illness. And she is right. But when she says she has depression, and I say I have depression, the word does not always even mean the same thing. As her Zoloft decreased in effectiveness, she began to feel somewhat blue. She had less energy. She had a drop in her self-esteem. When I have a depressive episode, I begin to want to die. I can't remember or believe any good attributes I might have. I can't believe anyone might care for me or love me. These negative thoughts fill my brain despite my efforts to rebut them. I'm stupid, I'm worthless, I should hurt myself, I should kill myself, and things will never change. And as one medication fades, generally takes 2 or 3, sometimes 4 attempts, each of which takes several weeks, before I find one that's mildly effective. In the meantime, I would frankly kill to feel the way my friend felt on the Zoloft before she switched to the better medication. But in the meantime, I get up every morning and try to find something to accomplish each day. I read my page of Talmud. I read email. I do chavruta, a side-by-side learning with a friend of mine. She listens to me intently. She reminds me I have something to contribute to the world. They say do at least one thing a day and be kind to yourself. But that's odd advice to give to a person who currently hates herself. What can you do? My husband, Dan, and I, as I mentioned, have a beautiful daughter who, with God's help, has become a lawyer, an adult, and she is blossoming. I am so grateful that she survived her childhood with a mother who came and went, who had times of intense involvement and months when I could barely get out of bed. She was always my priority. For her, I got up, I sat with her and my husband at dinner. I listened to her tell the stories of her life as she grew, and I praised God for the blessing of her presence. But still, I know there were times when I simply wasn't there. Just this past year, I sank. I would say starting in October or so, for almost 6 months, I kind of disappeared. To say I was depressed sort of understates the mood. I couldn't function. I stopped showering. I stopped reading, my favorite hobby, and I stopped praying. After being a regular at my synagogue for 30-some years, I stopped going. After praying daily for like 40 years, I kind of stopped. So 60% of people with mental illness describe that apparently consult a spiritual leader, and some 80% of us describe ourselves as spiritual. This is a religious as well as a psychological crisis. Do we as religious communities know how to respond? How can we be there for people in the middle of a mental health crisis? How can we reach out to their families? How can we make our communities welcoming to folks with mental illness, to people in AA and OA, to families in need, even if people don't want to really discuss their illness? We have posters in my synagogue in the women's room that reminds us that Jewish women are more susceptible to breast cancer. Where is the posting of the National Suicide Helpline for congregants who are silently in despair? Dial 988 and you get immediate local help. But that only works if you know about it. My home congregation, where I pray, Road of Shalom, has a mental health link on our website. If you press it, lo, there is a huge and comprehensive list of the kind of help people might need. We also have, for example, Colorado Crisis business cards and other resources in our lobby, including our Wise Covenant, so that people who are in need can find it easily and take the information privately. Surely we can duplicate this across Denver. So some time ago, my psychiatrist asked me what Judaism thought of suicide. And I think he was kind of wondering if he could get my spiritual life to interfere with my thoughts of self-harm. Not so much, I replied. The rabbis have in fact caught up to the understanding that suicide is the result of a disease and should be treated as such. But have our communities? A few years ago, a friend of mine lost her mother to suicide. And she didn't want to tell anyone, lest they think her mom a bad person. Most of us are quick to say things like, no, it's a disease. But you know, I have heard the talking outside of her presence, and it isn't pretty. We need to work on compassion. How much pain her mother must have felt. How complicated is the grief of those left behind. So many congregations bring baskets of food to families when they welcome a newborn into their house. But why don't we, not just your clergy, but we, members of perhaps a clearing committee, a mental health committee, a seasoned parent volunteer, call 6, 10, 12 weeks later to check on mom to see how she's doing, if she has baby blues, if she has postpartum depression. In many communities, caring committees are often designated to help the bereaved, to help new families, to help the ill. They bring food and company to those in need. They offer rides and things like that. Who might be interested in gathering together to reach out to the mentally ill? You can notice, for example, somebody who's a Sunday regular who suddenly isn't here, and then you pick up the phone and you call them. You can check in 6 months after a death in the family to see how survivors are. We can post mental health literature in our lobby to say, we see you. Folks with mental health challenges, you are welcome here. So the mitzvah, as we talked about earlier, Bikur Cholim, of visiting the sick, the rabbis teach in the Talmud that visiting the sick in and of itself is a redemptive act. It doesn't cure the one who is ill. but it is curative. It takes away what they say is 1/60th of the illness, which the rabbis, in the rabbinic mind, 1/60th is the smallest amount that still counts. Just being that non-anxious presence, sitting with someone who's mentally ill and hurting, that can help. Opening our doors to people with schizophrenia, OCD, and personality disorders is a way of fulfilling the value of welcoming the guest. And we can turn them from scary strangers into congregants and friends. Sometimes folks who are mentally ill can be difficult or challenging, pushing boundaries, unclear of limits, odd behaviors. So for us as a community, it becomes a matter of who do we want to be and how do we want to behave. One of the things that has gotten me through months and months of unrelenting psychological and spiritual pain was caring, not just of my husband, my mom, and my daughter, who were and are amazing, but also the 3 or 4 friends who called me pretty much every week to see how I was. The calls were often short, but their presence is a lifeline to the world. Folks here at St. Luke's, you do not need to be trained in therapy or pastoral care to reach out to a member who is hurting. You don't even need to know if the person is struggling with a mental illness. You could be a calm, caring voice over the phone, over a cup of tea, who's willing to say, gee, you haven't been at services in a while. We miss you. Can I help? And since when someone's depressed, it's hard to know what you need, sometimes a concrete suggestion is helpful. I'm going to church on Sunday. Can I pick you up around 9:45 and we can sit together? Sometimes all a mentally ill person needs is a presence, someone to sit with her and remind her she has worth. It is not our job to fix the mentally ill among us. It is our job to make sure they are not alone on their journey. Prayers for healing, then, must include the healing of the mind and the soul and the body. We must speak of mental illness from the pulpits as an actual illness, just like heart disease or cancer. It afflicts the person, but doesn't define the person. Sometimes someone with bipolar disorder or schizophrenia is ill and suffering with their disease. Sometimes that person is in remission and symptoms fade. Sometimes a person with anorexia or alcoholism is in recovery, and sometimes she might have a slip. But the person is always there, underneath, waiting to be found and hoping to be seen. We need to say the words mental illness. We need to say them over and over and over again. Clergy have to say them from the pulpit until it is as matter of fact as cancer. An illness, not a disgrace, not a failure, an illness. Why over and over? How many times those of you with children had to say to your children, look both ways before you cross the street, before they actually understood they needed to look both ways before they crossed the street, right? We have to say it over and over again until we all know it, till we really know it and accept it. And we accept that zelo kokach big deal, as they say in Hebrew. It is not, in fact, a big deal. So what do you say to someone with a mental illness? What do you say to me? Firstly, you needn't be afraid to tell your reactions to what I said today, positive or not. Your words will not kill me. And speaking to anyone, actually, often your words matter less than your caring. People will forgive you a surprising amount if they know you care. And remembering that you don't have to fix it, indeed you can't fix it, helps. Instead, sharing a how are you today, or an I'm glad to see you today, or just a smile. These gentle ways of acknowledging that you see the other and you appreciate their presence, that can help. That can be enough. So when new treatment recently kicked in and I began to feel better, I told my psychiatrist that he and my therapist had saved my life. And he paused and he said, well, for now, the effectiveness of treatments come and go. And it's my task in life to live knowing that it's better for now and it'll be worse again and then hopefully better. I need my community, I need my clergy, and I need God to help me walk through these times. So how do I help you to learn to help me and thousands of others walk their path? Earlier today, we talked about creating a wise covenant at St. Luke's. A wise covenant means thinking and writing seriously with commitment to actions around mental illness, to be welcoming, to be inclusive, to be supportive, and to be engaged. You have to talk about what values the church wants to highlight in connection with those with mental health challenges and their families. It's really easy to say those words. We're welcoming, we're inclusive, we're supportive, we're engaged, but it can be harder when folks at the church, for example, act oddly or are needy and have good boundaries. Creating such a covenant is a step on the journey of learning from one another, learning about one another, and doing so with love. How do we cry out to God? And what would it mean for God to be near? We can pray, but we can't force a miracle. But rather we step back to that first chapter of Genesis where we learn that each and every human being is created as a unique image of God. The rabbis teach, when a king of flesh and blood creates a coin, for example, in his image, each coin looks the same. But when the Holy One of blessing creates human beings in God's own image, each person's reflection of that image is unique. Each of us walking around is an image of God. So when I cry out to God, the response I get may be human. Another person asking about me, caring about me, and being there for me through thick and thin. We can let our faces shine on one another and radiate kindness, love, and acceptance. And then we can walk together. It is a vulnerable thing to be honest with each other about our deepest selves, to meet that honesty with care. But the psalmist reassures us that if we cry out, God will answer us, if in no other way than by creating community among us, the ill and the well, the broken and the not so broken, the less broken, all of us here together. And that, my friends, would be worth celebrating. And let us say,